The night did not feel electric, it felt heavy, the kind of heavy that presses against your ribs before a storm breaks. Except there was no thunder in the air, no visible sign that anything was about to change. The arena lights were bright, the ring was centered, the crowd was loud in that familiar way, but something underneath it all felt off. The matches went on as scheduled, bodies collided, music hit, hands were raised, yet a thin layer of discomfort hovered over everything like dust that refused to settle. The commentary desk tried to keep rhythm, tried to sell the spectacle, but their voices carried an unfamiliar hesitation, as if they were speaking carefully around something none of them wanted to name. Backstage, the locker room felt quieter than usual. Conversations stopped too quickly. Laughter ended mid-sentence. A few veterans sat with their hands wrapped, staring at the floor longer than necessary. Someone mentioned that the production team had adjusted the rundown twice in the last hour. Another swore they saw upper management in a closed-door meeting, faces pale, phones pressed tight against their ears. No official announcement had been made. No surprise guest had been advertised. And yet, the air was thick with expectation that did not feel exciting. It felt like waiting for bad news. The women's division, especially, carried an edge. They had been fighting for position for months, clawing for television time, negotiating their presence in a company that rewarded dominance and punished hesitation. In the center of that storm stood Jade Cargill, silent and controlled. She did not speak much that evening. She stretched alone, her movements deliberate, her posture unshaken. Even without words, she commanded the room. When she walked past, conversations thinned. She did not need to raise her voice to remind everyone who the standard was. She had built her presence on strength and certainty was something the locker room relied on, but certainty was dissolving. Rumors have a way of spreading without direction. A name began circulating in whispers, almost reluctantly, as if saying it aloud would make it real. Arissa LeBrock. Some said she had been seen near the building earlier that day. Others dismissed it as gossip recycled from social media threads, hungry for attention. It had been months since her last appearance. Months since the injury, the silence, the absence that slowly turned into assumption. Most believed she was gone for good. Another story folded into the past. And yet, production assistants kept glancing toward the entrance tunnel. As the final segment approached, an unease settled into the arena that no one could explain. The crowd noise dipped, not dramatically, but enough to notice. The camera panned across faces that looked more curious than excited. Commentary voices slowed, words stretching between breaths. Jade stood in the ring, composed, powerful, absorbing the spotlight as she always did. She expected a challenger. She expected noise. What she did not expect was the lights to dim, not with flair, but with restraint. The first note of unfamiliar music did not explode through the speakers. It crept in, soft, low, almost reluctant, and then the locker room froze. The sound did not belong to celebration. It did not carry the triumphant surge of a hero's return. It felt restrained, deliberate, almost confrontational in its slowness. The arena lights shifted downward, not into darkness, but into something muted, as if the brightness itself had chosen to step back. The audience leaned forward, uncertain whether to cheer or remain silent. The commentators began to speak, then stopped, their words catching in their throats when the Titantron flickered to life. There was no dramatic montage, no nostalgic recap, just a single image that confirmed what many had hoped was only rumor. The name appeared plainly across the screen, Arissa LeBrock. The reaction was fractured. Some fans gasped, hands covering their mouths, others remained motionless, processing. A small section cheered instinctively, but the sound faded quickly, swallowed by confusion. It was not the return people fantasized about on message boards. It was too sudden, too unceremonious. It felt as though the company had not prepared the audience to feel joy. The curtain parted slowly. Arissa stepped through without theatrics. No exaggerated pose, no exaggerated expression. Her face carried composure, but not warmth. She walked with measured steps, shoulders squared, eyes locked forward. The camera struggled to decide how to frame her, because she was not performing for it. She did not acknowledge the crowd. She did not look toward commentary. She looked only at the ring. And inside that ring stood Jade Cargill. Jade did not move. Her arms rested at her sides, posture tall, chin slightly lifted. She had built her reputation on dominance, on an aura that discouraged doubt. Yet even she blinked slower than usual, recalibrating in real time. There was no panic in her face, but there was calculation, the kind that happens when control begins to slip, not because of weakness, but because of unpredictability. Arissa walked halfway down the ramp before the weight of the moment truly settled. The crowd volume dipped into something haunting. No chants formed, no synchronized reaction united them. It was as if the audience collectively decided to observe rather than participate. That silence was louder than any roar. Backstage monitors flickered as wrestlers gathered around them. Some crossed their arms defensively. Others exchanged glances that carried concern rather than excitement. A producer was seen speaking rapidly into a headset, adjusting something that perhaps had not been fully secured. Authority figures hovered near gorilla position, faces tight, watching an entrance that felt less like a surprise and more like a disruption. Arissa reached ringside and paused. She did not rush up the steps. She circled once, eyes never leaving Jade. It was not intimidation in a theatrical sense. It was something heavier, personal, unresolved. When she finally stepped between the ropes, the ring felt smaller. Jade remained still. The two stood facing each other, neither blinking first, neither offering a gesture. No handshake, no strike. Just proximity, and in that stillness, the industry felt something shift. Not excitement, not celebration. Pressure. The moment stretched beyond comfort. Seconds felt elongated, like the air itself resisted movement. The crowd did not know whether to break the silence, and so they surrendered to it. Arissa stood close enough to Jade to feel her breath, but far enough to avoid contact. There was no smirk, no taunt. Just a stare that suggested unfinished business, too complex for a single night. Jade's jaw tightened slightly, a nearly imperceptible shift that only those who knew her composure could detect. Commentary attempted to interpret what they were witnessing, but their voices carried uncertainty. Words like unexpected and unbelievable felt insufficient. This was not a comeback engineered for applause. It felt like an intrusion into a structure that had grown comfortable in her absence. The women's division had reorganized itself around Jade's presence. She had become the gravitational center. Her dominance created stability, even for those who resented it. Now that center felt challenged, not with theatrics, but with quiet conviction. Arissa's return was not loud enough to be dismissed as spectacle. It demanded to be taken seriously. Backstage, anxiety surfaced openly. Some wrestlers whispered about opportunities shrinking. Others feared being overshadowed by a rivalry that could consume television time for months. A veteran shook her head slowly, muttering that surprises like this rarely end cleanly. Management paced behind monitors, calculating ratings spikes while simultaneously bracing for backlash. Arissa finally moved, not with aggression, but with intention. She stepped closer until only inches separated them. Jade did not retreat. Their eyes locked, neither yielding ground. The tension was not explosive, it was suffocating. The kind that makes observers uncomfortable because it feels too real. Then Arissa spoke quietly, words too soft for the crowd to hear, but clear enough for Jade. The cameras caught the shift in Jade's expression, subtle but undeniable. Something personal had been said. Something that bypassed performance and struck directly at identity. Arissa stepped back first. She did not attack. She did not provoke. She simply let the weight of her presence linger, then turned and exited the ring with the same measured pace she entered. The crowd remained frozen, unsure whether to feel cheated or terrified. Jade stood alone again, but the ring no longer felt like hers. When Arissa reached the stage, she paused briefly and looked back. Not triumphantly, not arrogantly, just long enough to confirm that the message had been delivered. The music faded without crescendo, and the consequences began immediately. Phones backstage lit up with messages from media outlets demanding confirmation. Social platforms erupted into divided debate. Some praised the boldness. Others questioned the timing. Analysts speculated about locker room morale, about power shifts, about whether the company had underestimated the emotional volatility of this decision. Jade remained in the ring, longer than usual, absorbing the moment alone. For the first time in months, dominance felt fragile. The aftermath did not wait for the show to end. By the time cameras stopped rolling, tension had already seeped into every corner of the building. Reporters gathered outside the arena, searching for statements that no one seemed ready to give. Headlines were drafted before official confirmation was even issued. The narrative was not unified. Some framed it as a bold reinvention of the division. Others described it as reckless timing that risked destabilizing established momentum. Inside the locker room, conversations were sharper. Wrestlers who had once measured themselves against Jade now found a new variable inserted into their calculations. Arissa's return did not simply threaten the title picture, it threatened hierarchy. Younger talent wondered whether their opportunities would evaporate under the shadow of a rivalry too intense to ignore. Veterans questioned whether management had prioritized shock value over locker room equilibrium. Jade walked through the hallway without her usual entourage. Her posture remained upright, but her silence carried new weight. Teammates offered cautious nods, unsure whether comfort or distance was more appropriate. She did not address anyone directly. Instead, she entered her locker room space and closed the door gently. Not out of anger, but to think. Authority figures convened, again, this time with visible strain. Contracts were reviewed. Storylines were reworked in real time. One executive voiced concern that the return felt less like a storyline and more like a challenge to corporate control. The unpredictability unsettled them. They had not anticipated how personal the confrontation appeared. Arissa, meanwhile, remained composed. She did not seek interviews. She declined immediate commentary. Her quiet intensified speculation. Some interpreted it as strategy. Others viewed it as defiance. What was clear was that she had not returned to coexist peacefully. The media cycle intensified overnight. Panels debated whether Jade's dominance had grown too comfortable. Critics argued that Arissa's presence exposed vulnerabilities that fans had not previously considered. Supporters of Jade defended her legacy fiercely, framing the return as opportunistic. Family members were pulled into conversations they never asked to join. Expectations resurfaced. Comparisons resurfaced. The weight of lineage, of perception, of public scrutiny pressed heavily on both women in different ways. Success in the ring had always demanded resilience, but this felt different. This felt invasive. By morning, training facilities buzzed with unease. Wrestlers arrived early, determined to assert relevance before the narrative swallowed them whole. Social media numbers surged, but so did internal anxiety. For Jade, the pressure was immediate. She was no longer the uncontested focal point. She now faced a rival who did not need theatrics to disrupt her authority. For Arissa, the challenge was equally heavy. A return carries expectation, and expectation can suffocate even the strongest. The company issued a brief statement confirming that both competitors would address the situation next week. It sounded procedural, but everyone understood that nothing about this felt routine. Days passed, yet the image of that silent confrontation lingered in the minds of everyone who witnessed it. It replayed in highlight packages, slowed down, analyzed frame by frame. Commentators dissected micro-expressions. Body language experts offered interpretations. None could fully explain why the moment felt heavier than most championship clashes. There had been no strike, no physical altercation, yet it unsettled the industry more than any dramatic brawl. Jade resumed training with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Each repetition carried more force, each drill executed with sharper precision. She did not publicly admit to feeling threatened, but those closest to her sensed the shift. Dominance had always been her armor. Now she had to ensure that armor did not crack under scrutiny. The burden of legacy pressed harder than before. Being the standard meant absorbing every challenge without visible doubt. Arissa trained just as relentlessly, though far from cameras. Her silence became strategic. She allowed speculation to grow unchecked, understanding that anticipation can be more powerful than promotion. Yet privately, the cost was evident. Returning is never simple. It requires confronting unfinished chapters, unresolved criticism, and internal fears about whether absence has changed perception. The locker room remained divided. Some aligned firmly behind Jade, viewing her as the rightful anchor of the division. Others gravitated toward Arissa's quiet defiance, intrigued by the disruption she represented. The tension was not openly hostile, but it was unmistakable. Trust felt thinner. Every interaction carried subtext. When the next show approached, ticket sales surged, yet backstage anxiety followed closely. Management prepared statements, contingency plans, narrative arcs designed to contain the volatility. But deep down, they understood something uncomfortable. They had not orchestrated this tension entirely. It had grown beyond script. The industry thrives on moments that feel authentic, and authenticity is rarely tidy. That night, when Arissa stepped back into the light, she did not just re-enter competition. She forced everyone to confront what stability truly meant. Jade, once unchallenged in presence, now had to redefine herself not as an uncontested force, but as a champion under scrutiny. As the weeks unfolded, anticipation built toward an inevitable confrontation. Not merely a match, but a reckoning. Yet beneath the hype, beneath the ratings discussions and merchandise spikes, something quieter persisted. Two competitors standing inches apart, neither willing to blink. The image refused to fade. Because this was not simply about power or titles. It was about identity under pressure. It was about how quickly control can feel fragile when someone refuses to acknowledge your dominance. And as the next arena lights prepared to dim once more, a question lingered heavier than before. When power is challenged, not with noise, but with silence, who truly holds it?